Is there a question?
Good morning. I would like to talk to you today about a success story in counterproliferation. This effort resulted in a joint and a very constructive team of the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Department of State, and the government of Kazakhstan. And therefore, I have with me today Secretary Christopher, Secretary Leary, the Ambassador of Kazakhstan, Ambassador Solomenov, and the American Ambassador to Kazakhstan, Ambassador Courtney. Yesterday, the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy completed a high-priority, extremely sensitive mission, which we called Project Sapphire, intended to help stem the spread of nuclear weapons and material. We have just transferred approximately 600 kilograms of weapons-grade, highly enriched uranium out of Kazakhstan at the request of the government of Kazakhstan and delivered the material to the Department of Energy's Y-12 plant in Oak Ridge in Tennessee for safe and secure storage. In other words, we have just placed in safe hands enough nuclear material from the former Soviet arsenal to make more than 20 nuclear devices. In fact, some of this material was in a form that could be used directly to make nuclear weapons. By removing it from the Alba metallurgical facility in Kazakhstan, where it was stored, and placing it at the Y-12 plant, we have put this bomb-grade nuclear material forever out of the reach of potential black marketeers, terrorists, or new nuclear regimes. Project Sapphire was made possible by the Nunn-Lugar Threat Reduction Program, which is designed to help former Soviet states dismantle the Cold War nuclear arsenal and infrastructure that is still on their territories. This is a tremendous success story for the Nunn-Lugar program. Both the United States and Kazakhstan had serious concerns about the security of the material. Now it is secure. There is no better example of how the Nunn-Lugar program can help eliminate a national security threat before it arises. This is defense by other means, and in a big way. Under our agreement to take control of this nuclear weapons-grade material, the United States will provide assistance through the Nunn-Lugar program to help Kazakhstan eliminate its nuclear weapons infrastructure and reorient the technical skills of its nuclear experts and infrastructure to civilian purposes. The State Department's Freedom Support Act will provide additional funds to help Kazakhstan repair the damage from years of Soviet nuclear weapons testing within its borders. Let me tell you briefly how Project Sapphire came about. It began when the Kazakhstani government approached the United States to inform us that it had custody of this weapons-grade uranium and it lacked the means to store, secure, or properly dispose of. They asked us to help ensure that this material did not become a proliferation nightmare. We recognized both the risk of proliferation and the opportunity to prevent it, and moved quickly to develop jointly a plan to transfer the material here. After months of planning, the project officially began on October the 7th, when President Clinton directed the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy to initiate the transfer. Now, Vice President Gore was involved in leading this operation thereafter. It culminated last weekend when the nuclear material was picked up at the Alba plant in Kazakhstan and flown out of the closest airport in Ust by military airlift. The last of this material arrived at Dover Air Force Base Monday night and was shipped in special containers via high-security ground convoy to the Y-12 plant, where it arrived this morning and went into safe storage. The transfer went very smoothly, with no risk to the security or the health or safety at either end. The people involved not only completed a highly complex, sensitive mission with great success, they have done a great deal to make the world safer from nuclear danger. If that wasn't enough, the U.S. technical team in Kazakhstan also took this opportunity to raise funds among themselves for infant clothes, baby formula, and cold weather gear for local orphanages. In addition, when the Air Force transports flew to Kazakhstan to pick up the U.S. technical team and the nuclear material, the planes brought almost 40,000 pounds of aid. I would like to personally congratulate the crack U.S. interagency team and all the personnel involved for their great work and for going above and beyond the call of duty. But the United States especially wants to thank President Nazarbayev and the Kazakhstan government for its wisdom in seeking safe storage for this material and for seeking our help. This is global leadership for the post-Cold War era, and it results in no small part from the trust, the understanding, and the cooperation building between the United States and Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has made tremendous strides in joining the community of forward-looking nations. It quickly agreed to rid its territory of nuclear weapons and early this year signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And it demonstrated a sensitivity to regional security by consulting with the Russian government before proceeding with Project Sapphire. Over the past year, the U.S.-Kazakhstan relationship has grown and deepened, and we are grateful for this new gesture of cooperation and trust. We applaud President Nazarbayev and the Kazakhstan government for helping to make the world safer and more secure. Now I'd like to give Secretary Christopher, Secretary Leary an opportunity to talk about the crucial role their departments played in this success story. When we're done with that, the three of us will be prepared to take a few questions. And then we have Dr. Carter and the staff from Energy and State prepared to answer, prepared to provide additional background information after our briefing. Secretary Christopher?
Secretary Perry, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here with Secretary Perry and Secretary Leary to mark a quite important event. The transfer of this highly enriched uranium from Kazakhstan to the United States is really a landmark event in President Clinton's non-proliferation strategy. From the outset, our administration has made non-proliferation a strategic foreign policy goal. We've made non-proliferation really the arms control issue of the 1990s. I think the dangers that are posed by proliferation of nuclear weapons are very clear. Particularly they're clear in a situation where there's a risk that rogue states or rogue individuals might get control of these materials. President Clinton said last year at the United Nations, weapons like this can destabilize an entire region. They could turn a local conflict into a global human and environmental catastrophe. The action we recognize today is an example of our determination to ensure that the Soviet nuclear legacy does not become a source of instability in the post-Cold War world. This has been a good week on non-proliferation. The recent action by Ukraine, which we recognized at the White House yesterday, to embrace the nuclear non-proliferation treaty is a very important and positive development in the same direction, in the same area. These efforts in the former Soviet Union, of course, complement our efforts to halt proliferation in Asia, most notably with the recently concluded framework accord with North Korea, as well as the steps toward control of missile proliferation with China. Each of these actions supports our drive to secure an indefinite extension of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as well as our work toward a comprehensive test ban over the course of the next year. As Secretary Perry has said, the highly enriched uranium that has now been transferred from Kazakhstan to the United States is enough to have really started a very substantial small nuclear arsenal. Kazakhstan took its obligation very seriously to protect this material, and I want to express my appreciation to Ambassador Solomonayov, who is here with us today. I want to also express my appreciation to the Atomic Energy Agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which will maintain safeguards on this material. Appreciation also to the government of Russia. We consulted carefully with them about this legacy of the Soviet nuclear program. Our ambassador, Bill Courtney from Kazakhstan, who is here today, did a superb job of diplomacy on what was a fairly difficult diplomatic mission. I want to congratulate all the dedicated members of the team from the Defense Department and the Energy Department, as well as those from the State Department who worked through this project to maintain the secrecy that was so important to it and was able to carry it off. So we have a landmark event here, and I'm glad that we were part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Perry and Secretary Christopher. I'd like to focus for just a bit on the details of this very historic operation. I would remind you that Y-12 just this year had undergone its first in a series of inspection visits by the International Atomic Energy Agency, making Y-12 therefore a safeguarded site which the IAEA will ultimately complete its review as a safeguarded entity within the United States of America. That is a key fact. But I want to focus you for a bit on this team of 27 nuclear experts, flight operators and determiners, and of course translators, who went into Kazakhstan and spent 6 weeks doing 6 months worth of work, establishing a factory, as it were, about the size of a 3 or 4 car garage to process this high enriched uranium. The support facility, which provided some 99% of the equipment, the energy for the work, has been described to me as about the size of a county fair in Tennessee. I think it's important to focus on these issues to give you some idea of the very enormous effort undertaken by both men and women working on this project. The speed with which we and they had to move was occasioned by the weather, as we were fearing that we would not be able to transport the material once safely contained and ready for movement should the winter weather set in. I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Alex Reedy, who will later be available to talk with you, who led this team. He's part of the DOE's Martin Marietta team at Oak Ridge, and he shared with me last night the fact that this was for him a very great honor and something that his team was happy to do. I want to also focus on the humanitarian effort and give that, too, a personal flavor. This team, I want to tell you, worked 10 to 12 hours every day, 6 days a week. On the rare 7th day when they were off, their colleagues working there at the site simply took them sightseeing around the area. And the USA team asked, is there anyone nearby who needs some assistance? And they were told about 2 orphanages and a pension home for those who were retired. From that one question, this team on the ground adopted an orphanage and later decided on their own that they would like to collect funds so that the youngsters living in 2 orphanages there would receive milk, other food, and clothing for the warm winter, for the cold winter. They then called back to the States, discussed with their colleagues, both at Martin Marietta and at the Defense Department, and in the Department of Energy, the further need for other equipment to get citizens through the winter. That phone call led to a follow-on of the $1,800 that the team on the ground put together for the youngsters in the orphanage, and then the delivery of some 30,000 pounds of equipment that went in with the transport ship to bring out the material. I do believe on the eve before Thanksgiving that this is an important fact to celebrate as well, and my colleagues have brought with them a few pictures of the youngsters at the orphanage so that you can get the sense of that part of the story. There they are receiving some goods and toys that were purchased in Kazakhstan. And here are a group of the youngsters outside of the orphanage when our colleagues visited there. I want to focus for a moment on several key facts which I believe are important. I understand that it was reported in one of the national new press this morning that we found the conditions there in Kazakhstan to be unsafe. I want to be clear that the United States was in at the request of the Kazakhstan government, looking at how we could move that material into an IAEA safeguarded facility. That was the mission, and so I want to correct that impression or improve upon the discussion that someone had with the press. I need for a moment to discuss now conditions at Y-12. The point to be made, and you should take away with you, is that the material moving into Y-12 is non-irradiated material, not nuclear waste. The environmental assessment that we undertook in the late fall asked the question, which one living nearby Y-12 would want to have answered: how safe is this material? And the answer coming out of that environmental assessment was safe to workers who would be handling it, as Mr. Reedy's team did, and are now handling it at Y-12, so much so that the dosage received in simply handling this material, which is shielded by about 1.5 inches of steel, would simply submit those workers to about 15 millirems of radiation. You need to know that the normal dose of radiation we all receive normally in our everyday lives is 170 millirems. Most importantly, I believe, is the fact that once the material is safely stored, as it will be and is now at Y-12, the exposure to anyone in the community is 0.10 millirems. That's an important fact for you to know because people in the community are very concerned and often confused about the difference between waste, which this is not, and non-irradiated material, which this is. Finally, you should know that we discussed the details of this operation with our regulators who have responsibility for regulating the safety of nuclear material at our sites. And they are comfortable and understand that for the short term, this material meets their requirements, and they will go in subsequently during this coming month to ensure that for the interim term, the material will be at the site, that it will remain in the safe status, as is the case of all material at Y-12. The final point I would like to make involves the interim nature of the storage at Y-12. As the President directed us when he assigned this mission to this team of departments, we were to ensure that this material moves on to be downblended so that it might be used in a commercial nuclear reactor application. We will, within a number of weeks, be soliciting the private sector for an opportunity to downblend this high-enriched uranium to low-enriched uranium, which now makes it a commercial product that any utility could purchase. There are a number of steps we have to go through, not the least of which are securing its release from Customs. Customs still has legal authority over it, though it is in the possession of the United States DOE, and ultimately moving it into commerce. It is my intention, and I have so committed, that within 3 to 6 months, we will understand which commercial facility will do the down blending. I think that completes the details of my story. I would once again want to emphasize with each of you, as we have talked about the new nuclear danger, it is these issues that we have contemplated, and this is a very happy day for a celebration of an issue seen to be important internationally, and responsible governments in Kazakhstan and the United States of America, with a great team of real live people on the ground in Kazakhstan, working with their colleagues there to accomplish this very important mission. And I'm proud to be associated with everyone who's been involved in this endeavor.
Secretary Perry.
Mr. Secretary?
Sir, are there any comparable plans underway to do a similar removal from, say, Ukraine, Belarus, and other countries of the former Soviet Union which may have weapons-grade uranium stored?
We have no such plans at this time.
Mr. Secretary,
could you tell me,
You can see that person.
Mr. Secretary, can you tell us, there's been a statement from some elements of the Russian government that this is not really weapons-grade material. Can you assure us that it actually was? And also, does this constitute the entire amount of material that was in Kazakhstan?
This is very highly enriched uranium. It is weapons-grade material. I state that unambiguously. I cannot state categorically that there is no other such source anywhere else. As far as we know, this is it.
Mr. Secretary, when did Kazakhstan first bring this situation to your attention? Was your first approach to try to persuade the Russians to accept it? And in monetary terms, what does Kazakhstan gain from this?
Kazakhstan is getting a agreed package of compensation, including both funds from the non-Lugar, the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, and from the State Department's Freedom Support Act. I'm not free at this time to describe the the details of that compensation package. This discussion began, it was late summer or early fall of last year. I don't remember the exact month. And the Russian government was brought in very early in the discussions before any final decisions were made to move material out.
Secretary Perry, could you give us an indication of what this operation cost the United States with all three departments?
The airlift costs, which was the primary cost to the Department of Defense, were about $3 million. Perhaps Secretary Leary could add to that the DOE costs that were involved.
Well, the DOE cost would have included the 27 DOE contract employees who were part of that team, and the necessary equipment to support the team, including the food and fuel for them. If not today, now, then certainly this afternoon we will tote all of those costs to the maximum extent that I can and provide them to you.
Secretary, can you tell me, please, sir, whether you know if this cache of weapons-grade material was targeted by any country or terrorist group for possible smuggling out of Kazakhstan?
We don't know of such. We do not know of such targeting.
You don't have any idea whether any
I don't have any
country-
idea of such targeting.
Secretary,
Yes.
thank you. If I could, to follow up the question to Secretary O'Leary, I'm not clear as to whether the material was purchased or donated by the government of Kazakhstan. And to follow that a little further, is the United States now open for business to purchase, acquire, and store materials that might be unsecure in other parts of the former Soviet Union?
I think this situation was probably sui generis. It was a one-of-a-kind in terms of the combination of the fact that the material was very highly enriched, that is direct weapon-grade material, that the government of Kazakhstan came to us and asked for assistance and support. And I want to emphasize, they were guarding this material properly. The statement that it was poorly guarded is not correct. But it was a great drain on the resources to do it. They did not have the facilities that enable them to do that routinely as we do. It was much more effective and more efficient for this to be included in the large supply of similar material that we have at the Y-12 plant. I don't know, we are not in business for and seeking to repeat this, but if a similar, identical situation come up, the factors that led us to make this decision, I think would similarly be true.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes.
Question.
Do you expect Oak Ridge to be the site for future shipments of any foreign material that you get? And have you increased security out there to keep track of that?
Well, the amount of this additional material amounts to 0.11% of the total supply that we can accommodate at Oak Ridge. So it's a minor amount against the total. So we don't need to add additional people for that amount. Understand as well that we contemplate accepting more of our own material into Oak Ridge. And you need to know that in doing the environmental assessment, we also gave ourselves a cushion of 10% of the total storage available at Y-12 for foreign materials, not contemplating that we would need to receive them, but being fairly broad and trying to plan for our environmental assessment. But I want to be clear that that would only be 10%, a 10% addition on what we expect to have taken when the facility is totally occupied.
Secretary Perry.
No, I don't. I want to reaffirm what Secretary Perry has already said. We do not contemplate at this time additional shipments. But what I have learned in the time I've been in this job is it's always nice to contemplate some contingency. And so this contingency was contemplated when we were developing the environmental assessment, which I'm required to do under the law as well.
Secretary Perry.
You said this was being guarded properly, was your word, by the Kazakh authorities. Does that mean then that the decision to go to this trouble and expense was one that was mainly driven by economic factors, relieving economic burdens from the Kazakh government rather than concerns about security?
Now, the concern was about security was the driving factor, both on the part of the government of Kazakhstan and on the part of the government of the United States. We have a facility in Tennessee that was precisely designed to do this. It does it for large amounts of material. It was very simple to add this small, relatively small amount of material. And essentially no extra cost to us to maintain the continual storage of it.
Secretary Perry, can you...
I think it's important to add that the real kicker here was qualifying for International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards, which is something that the Department of Energy was already working on, being the first nation in the world to invite that inspection to one of its nuclear production facilities. And I would like to use this as an opportunity to invite other nuclear weapons nations to contemplate and take the same action.
Secretary Perry, can you comment on the airstrikes in Bosnia and whether they will relieve the situation in Bihać in any way?
The airstrikes in Bosnia, which were conducted against the airfield there a few days ago, were for the specific purpose of deterring future airstrikes by the Serbs against Bihać and other areas. We believe they will be successful in doing that. If they are not, we will have to take additional action. The airstrikes today were specifically against surface-to-air missile facilities, which were threatening the NATO air patrol in that area. We have had a long-standing practice. We've been conducting air patrol over that areas for many, many months now, and we've had a long-standing rules of engagement that if any of those surface-to-air missiles try to engage or illuminate our aircraft, we are free to strike them.
Secretary Christopher, could I ask you, please, is it true that the government of Bosnia has said that if Bihać falls, it will have to seriously consider giving up on its support of the contact group peace plan and also perhaps even pulling out of the Croatian Federation? And just generally speaking, what is the United States and what are the Allies prepared to do to keep Bihać from falling?
On the first part of your question, there's no doubt that President Izetbegovic and Prime Minister Saladic regard the situation in Bihać as a very serious one, and if it were to fall, I think the consequences would be serious. Prime Minister Seladic called me on Sunday to express appreciation for the steps that we were taking, and we had a good talk. I told him we were going to be doing everything we could. Now, the various steps we're taking is to encourage the establishment of an exclusion zone. We're contacting our colleagues in NATO about further action that might be taken in the Bihać pocket. As you know, a ceasefire is being sought by the United Nations, and so we're encouraging each of those actions that might relieve the pressure on the Bihać pocket and the city of Bihać, and we'll be working at that today. But it is a serious situation, and on the first part of your question, Barry, I think the leaders of Bosnia are watching this situation with a good deal of care.
Madam Secretary.
So all the time we have,
was the material processed in Kazakhstan?
Say it again.
How exactly was the material processed in Kazakhstan?
I think
And
what
how will you
We have a
separate
background
only
briefing
two
coming up
areas?
right now.
Here's what I
to cover
think
that
you
one.
ought to do. You ought to take advantage of Alex Reedy, who's here, who can give you the real details of the operation and give it a real human touch. So I leave him in your hands as well.
Thank you for the good name.
Sparks.